Blueberry Hill was designed to be a fun, technical course with lots of terrain and shot variety. It currently is our most popular course, with about half of the throws in the woods. It has dual cement tees for blue and red skill levels. There are also a few gold temporary tee positions. Most of the holes have 2 pin placements. The course ranges from 3,900 feet up to 7,200 feet for daily play, depending on what configuration is being played. Hole number 1 is an easy, level hole with 1 pin placement at 210 feet. It runs through the woods with both a left and right route that are equally challenging. However, a shank tee shot only 5 feet off the fairway into the brush on the right can make it tough to save a 3. Hole 2 is one of the most popular holes at Highbridge, with one of the best views from the hilltop. It's a wide-open, bag-emptying tee shot downhill toward 3 tiers that were designed to be elevated ball golf tee pads. The short pin is perched on the corner of the second tier at 370 feet from the blue tee. The long pin is on a small mound past the third tier at 530 feet. It's easy for righties to hyzer out early and not land on the tier. If you try to overcompensate, you run the risk of turning over the tee shot too much and going OB on or across the road, which borders the west side of the fairway. Hole 3 starts with a wide-open, downhill tee shot, which eventually must curve to the left through a gap in the trees to reach either pin placement. The short pin, at 330 feet from the blue tee, is placed just before a small marsh that's OB. The long pin, at 390 feet, is tucked just beyond the row of trees, but it's real easy to short arm the drive and hook it into the woods. The conservative play is to throw straight to stay away from the woods, then make a routine upshot for a 3. Hole 4 has a short pin placement at 245 that can be reached from the left or right side, but the road is an OB risk on the right. The long pin at 415 is best reached from the left. A righty backhand roller over flat mowed grass can work well from the blue tee for this longer pin, which is tucked back in the woods. There's a large granite rock formation just short of the long pin, which can be used to skip an approach to reach it. Hole 5 is the first hole with a wooded corridor that can cause trouble. The short pin, at 320 uphill from the blue tee, is tough to reach, but it's possible to get in position for a deuce putt. The long pin, at 385 uphill, looks tempting for the long arms, but caution is in order to avoid bogey or worse if you miss. The little pond in front of the red tee can be cleared by beginners, but it will occasionally snag errant rebounds from an early tree smack. Hole 6 is a wide-open, slightly uphill tee shot to the short pin at 265 that can be reached from the left or the right. The longer pin at 425, which is slightly downhill, requires a relatively straight drive to set up for an approach into the woods. Long arms who try to go for too much can find themselves in trouble in the woods left or right. Hole 7 is one of the easiest, fun holes on the course. From the red tee, it's a simple 170-foot downhill toss. The tricky part is not to let the big rock in front of the tee cause you to lift up your drive. From the blue tee, The first part of the drive is relatively flat through the woods before the fairway drops away. It takes some control so your drive doesn't curve out left or right as it drops down towards the basket. Hole 8 is perhaps the signature hole for many players when it's in the long position at 605 feet uphill. Caution is in order on this long, almost 350-foot corridor through the woods from the blue tee. Most righties fare better throwing a slightly understable disc with a little hyzer on the tee shot to keep it in the fairway. The short pin has an impressive oak guarding access as your approach pops out of the woods. The long pin is located on the top of a large rock formation that falls off to the left but has a safer landing area to the right. Hole 9 is a short but tricky hole that curves to the right. The short pin is slightly uphill on the backside of a slope. It's hard to put the brakes on your 195-foot throw, but if you try to come in too low, you can easily get stopped maybe 50 feet short and have a really dangerous putt. The risk on the long pin at 250 feet is overhooking your shot into the woods on the right or coming up short. Hole 10 looks like a ball golf hole because the blue tee is actually on an elevated golf tee. Reaching the short pin is treacherous because a shot from the blue tee has to be thrown almost straight 330 feet and clear the small marsh in front of the pin. A tee shot can be thrown high to the right, but it has to gently hook back before crashing into the thick row of hemlocks guarding the right side. The long pin at 520 feet requires some precision to reach it on the approach shot from the ideal landing areas. Long arms have to be wary of the marsh at 400 feet and not hyzer out into the woods on the left. Hole 11 should be easy, but it seems to play tougher. Players can see the pin straight ahead 245 feet from the blue tee. However, the gap isn't very wide and can be trouble if thrown offline, not to mention the possibility of kicking back into the marsh. The safe throw is an easy lefty hyzer or righty forehand around the left side. Hole 12 is a challenging long dogleg to the right that's 470 feet to the short pin and 590 feet to the long pin. The ideal landing zone for the drive to each pin is the same open area in the fairway. There's a tendency to want to drive too close to the right side, which is unnecessary and will likely result in a tougher upshot. The short pin has two approach routes, with the right one over the marsh that's not obvious unless you're looking for it. The routes for approaching the long pin are more open and requires an accurate long throw. Hole 13 is easier to understand looking back from the long pin on the edge of the third pond, as seen in this picture. From the blue tee, the throws to the short and long pins are both uphill, and the edges of the ponds cannot be seen from the tee. It's a wide open 220-foot throw to the short pin from the blue tee. It's highly risky to drive 385 feet uphill to clear the nearby pond and reach the long pin. The conservative drive is to throw a right curve and land to the right of the short pin to set up an open approach. Hole 14 has three different left-turning routes from the blue tee to the 230-foot short pin. But hitting the very tight middle one is more likely due to luck than accuracy. The long pin at 390 feet is tucked back in the woods. It's pretty risky to try and drive into the opening. A good drive slightly short of the short pin is a good setup position for the approach to the long pin. Hole 15 throws down a wooded corridor that bends to the right, although the short pin is visible straight ahead off both tees. At 180 feet to the short pin, just throw it straight at it. The long pin at 265 requires a much more controlled drive with power to successfully park it. The wooden posts visible in the photo add a little landscape design to the hole. Hole 16 is a challenging dogleg that plays tougher to the short pin than its 370 feet might indicate. The tee shot can be shorter than the approach depending on how it's played. Throwing a low right curve about 150 feet slightly around the corner usually sets up an approach that slightly curves to the left. Players may also try to get farther down the fairway by throwing a blind, flat or slight hyzer over the trees. The long pin at 505 feet and uphill makes this a very tough double dog leg, although the last leg is out in the open. Hole 17, uphill 205 feet to the short pin, has turned out to be one of the easiest holes on the course with either a straight or righty hyzer tee shot. The long pin at 390 feet sharply uphill will not be played until the rock waterfall across the large exposed granite surface is completed. The rock surface and a collecting pool below it will be OB. Players will likely have to choose to go left or right off the tee, since only the longest arms will be able to risk throwing over the granite waterfall. The hole 18 shot from the blue tee requires a powerful uphill throw that's either straight or one that curves slightly to the right, whether playing to the short pin at 320 or the long pin at 390. The approach is particularly tricky to land near the short pin perched on a ledge. The approach to the long pin is relatively open and on flat ground. That's our tour for Blueberry Hill. Now check out some of the other great courses at Highbridge Hills Sports Complex.